afternoon, and thank you so much for tuning back into Chapman Law Group and to one of our video blogs. Today we're going to be talking to Rob Andretz, who is one of our attorneys. He works in the regulatory division and has a particular interest in DWIs, OUILs, people that have had professionals' problems with being arrested, being charged with drunk driving, impaired driving. Good afternoon, Rob. How are you today?
I'm doing fine. Thanks, Ron.
Good. Could you please explain to the audience a little bit about yourself?
Thank you. So my background, originally in college, I specialized in biology as well as psychology. And then I went to law school afterwards. So being here at the Chapman Law Group, where I help professionals in their many different issues with licensing and criminal matters, is a perfect fit. It draws back on my scientific background, and I'm able to help them in that area. So my law school litigation was my concentration there, and this is ultimately what led me here. I've handled people in criminal matters since 2007, as well as professional licensing matters as well. And I find that my passion for helping people fits perfectly with the interests of this firm and what we're trying to accomplish here to help our clients.
Now, one of the areas that we want to talk about today is in impaired driving, drunk driving. There's all kinds of different names. And you have a particular interest in that area. In fact, prior to coming here, you've litigated a lot of cases relating to people being charged with drunk driving or impaired driving.
That's correct. So for many years, I've handled drunk driving and drug driving cases all over many different courts, all across the state of Michigan, as well as I've even handled some criminal matters outside of the state of Michigan as well. And when people are charged with a criminal offense, what I find when people are healthcare professionals, these are people who help other people. They're not used to being in a situation where they're the ones in the hot seat. They're the ones who need the help. It's very difficult to handle that. And to know that your whole career, your whole livelihood, your license might be on the line. You might not be able to provide for your family. So those things I think are paramount when we're trying to defend a case like that, because there's much more than just the legal wranglings that might be related to somebody's driver's license and other matters, which are also important. But very important is always thinking first and foremost, how do we protect this career? How do we protect this individual job, and how do we protect this license? So those are things that go from the very beginning and how we handle a matter like this when someone's charged with something like drunk driving, drug driving, or drug diversion.
So let's go back to the beginning and let's talk about somebody who is pulled over and they take a PBT test, or they're taken down to the station and they're given a blood test or a breath test, and they test positive and they're over, some limit. What happens? When do we get involved? What can we do about that?
Right. Well, it's important to contact us right away because we can start helping even before charges have been filed against anybody. So the natural process is a lot of times people are arrested and taken back to a police station, but sometimes they might be in a hospital and they're not actually charged for some time, or they might be waiting for blood test results to come back. So there might be quite a gap in time between when the initial stop for a drunk driving or drug driving happens and when they're actually charged in court. But that doesn't mean that our offense has to wait until we're actually charged and they're actually in the courtroom. A lot of things that we do from the beginning is about discovering the client's story. We need to know from you what happened, how it all happened, and from your point of view, rather than just from the police officer's point of view or the point of view from a video camera. Those are important too. We'll be reviewing those throughout the discovery process in the earlier part of the case. But even before a case is formally in the courtroom, we have a lot of things that we would like to do right away. Another thing is a substance abuse evaluation. The courts are concerned, and rightfully so, that there might be an issue with someone who's charged with drunk driving, that this could be a bigger concern than just this one incident. So it's important for us to get ahead of that, get a substance abuse evaluation that might be respected by that court, and may also have a benefit to the clients down the road when they are dealing with licensing matters as well. So those are things that we would like to do right off the bat and discuss treatment options and things. But we typically would wait until knowing what that substance abuse evaluation indicates before recommending a certain treatment plan or a certain number of AA meetings or different things like that.
Now, you're licensed in the state of Michigan. In Michigan, do you handle the criminal aspect of it as well, or just the regulatory aspect?
I handle it beginning to end. So I'm been a criminal defense attorney handling these cases for years and years. And so I handle the criminal drunk driving case, and if there's the goal, but there would be to eliminate a conviction so that there wouldn't be a licensing matter afterwards. But if there were, then I could help the client with that as well. And so some clients I've had from the beginning of the matter, from right after they've had an arrest, all the way through any kind of professional licensing actions that was taken against the client.
So let's pick it up from somebody's charged with impaired or drunk driving, and either they're found guilty or they plead guilty, and then there's a conviction. What happens then with respect to their license? What's the process? What can we do to help?
First and foremost, it's really important that the conviction be reported. In the state of Michigan, it's a 30-day window. Other states have different requirements, but it's important to know each state's requirement for reporting that conviction. Also, many clients are licensed in more than one state. So there might be different reporting requirements in each of those states. So we need to make sure that we cover all the bases on those so that all the states are notified about a conviction.
Do you assist, whether they're licensed in one state or 10 states, do you assist them in drafting those notifications and notifying all of those licensing bodies?
Yes. So it's really important that we help the client with that, because there's different requirements in different places. Now, that process is something we can help the client with after there's a conviction. Just it's important to be aware of the timelines. Many people come to us after they've already had a different person defending them in a criminal defense matter. And so they already have a conviction and they don't know what to do next. And they're concerned about what happens licensing wise. And many people don't know there's a reporting requirement to let the state know about this conviction. There's an assumption that, of course, they would know about it. It was the state of Michigan or the state of Indiana or the state of Florida that brought the case against them. The state must know about it, but it's not the case. They have to actually let them know because there's a reporting requirement.
And if you don't report in a timely, whether it's a drunk driving or any kind of a felony or serious misdemeanor conviction, that can be a separate allegation or a separate penalty against you from the licensing board, correct?
That's correct. So that's its own public health code violation to not report within the time frame. And this also includes other licensing actions in other states. So sometimes you can have something that happens in one state criminally that causes a licensing action in another state that then ends up having to be also reported back to the state where it all began, because it's a licensing action that was taken by another state. So it's important to make sure all those reporting requirements are met.
And I know you're one member of the regulatory team, which has, I believe, 5 attorneys in it in different states. Do you stay with that client and walk them through all of those processes and help them, achieve good results when it comes to their licensing?
Oh, absolutely. So we do have a team, so we can rely and bounce ideas off of each other, but I would be the one handling the client from beginning to end for the criminal matter through the licensing matter. Sometimes I have clients who are licensed in multiple states. And since we have offices in Florida, it's always very nice when we're able to seamlessly transfer a client who has both licensing issues in Florida and Michigan between different attorneys here. I can give a call over to our branch office there and say, hey, Sarah, this is what's going on with this particular client, and this is what needs to happen for the client there. And we can hand things off from one office to the other and help the client across the different states.
Now, once there's a conviction and you report it to the state, what happens next?
Okay. The process varies from place to place. And what we see a lot of times is what's called an administrative complaint might be filed against a client, and they would have to respond to that within 30 days of receiving it. Other times what we'll see is a letter will come to the client that says something like there's a referral for the Health Professional Recovery Program, or HPRP. And this lets them know that the state has referred them over out of concerns of substance abuse in that situation. So sometimes we see those different routes taken by the state. And if there's sometimes that additional issue where the client may have had one or more convictions in the past that were not reported, sometimes there's multiple counts in that administrative complaint, one of those being that there was a failure to report the conviction. So we've had a client from the beginning to end, we don't have those issues because we made sure to report that conviction. So at least there's no issue with that.
Now, in a state like Florida, what would happen is there would be a letter of investigation you would have to respond to, and they would go through the investigative process. So here in Michigan, they may jump straight to filing a complaint against you.
They may. They have an ability to do an investigation, but they may or may not actually contact the individual. If it's just a drunk driving or impaired driving, drug driving, sometimes the clients are not aware that there was an investigation that was done. In order for an administrative complaint to have been filed against them, there had to be an investigation done, but they're sometimes not privy to that investigation or have an ability to communicate with anybody about that.
So what can we do for the practitioner to give them a better result?
Well, from the beginning, we want to make sure we understand who our clients are. Everyone has different needs and different wants and different life situations that are going on. So what's good for one client may not be the most important thing for another. Sometimes we have clients who are very close to the end of their careers. They're looking at making sure they have a good legacy that they're ending with things with. Some are brand new and they've been licensed for less than a year. And so the different licensees, depending on what they're dealing with in their lives, it's important that we focus our defense around that. Sometimes it can be a very different result from one client to another with the exact same things, depending on what was important to the individual client. So that's important right from the beginning, is that we understand the client's needs so we can focus our attention on there. Now, after that, we kind of have a list of things that are our priorities. And then we want to make sure that we hit all the priorities as much as we can as we're trying to negotiate a different result there. And ultimately, if we can't get the result we're looking for through the compliance conference process or negotiations, then we can proceed on to a hearing. And at the hearing, then an administrative law judge would decide whether or not a public health code violation had happened and what the result would be in a proposal for decision that's sent over to the particular board.
What are some things, Rob, that we can do to proactively help the client? Do we send them out for an evaluation? Well, attacking the process, looking to mitigate? What are the kinds of things we can do?
Well, for example, in the drunk driving and impaired driving cases, right from the beginning with helping them in the criminal matter, we're also planning out how we're helping them in the licensing matter as well. And the passage of time that goes on here can be many months from beginning to end. So if a client has gotten a substance abuse evaluation at our recommendation early on, that same substance abuse evaluation may be something that I can use in a licensing matter later on to say, months and months ago, the client got a substance abuse evaluation. The recommendation was for the following things to happen. All of those things have been completed. I've had cases with clients who've been licensed in multiple states. One example was a client who was licensed in Michigan and Florida, and had moved down to Florida and had not actually reported a conviction for drunk driving, and I dealt with the situation afterwards. We ultimately got that count dismissed. That was the failure to report, and they understood through the compliance conference process, the chairperson of the particular board understood after having the compliance conference, this is nothing intentional. So there's different things that can happen sometimes, and the results obviously from case to case are different, but our goal is to try to find ways that we can show that our clients are being proactive and not just waiting around for something to happen. And by doing that, we can sometimes have a pretty dramatic impact on what the end result is. Sometimes what's initially offered in something is very different than what the end result is after we've worked at trying to negotiate and continually push why our client has certain needs or whatever the issue might be, or why they're not a danger to the public health, safety, or welfare.
What are some of the proactive things? You said there's proactive things we can do. What are some of the proactive things that can be done?
Well, specifically in drunk driving issues, the concern is public safety. So both in the criminal arena as well as the licensing arena, there's a concern that the person is going to offend again, is going to drink and drive again. So the things that we can do to try to prove that the person is not going to do that might be testing. We might do alcohol testing. A recent case, a client went above and beyond what the court had ordered as far as testing goes, and ultimately that had a huge impact in what the end result was in the case for the client, because she was able to show all these months of abstinence from any kind of alcohol whatsoever, despite an accident with property damage and despite a very high blood alcohol level. So that's a perfect example. That same information, if she down the road gets a licensing matter that comes from this, we'll be able to use all that information to show this is why the HPRP doesn't need to be monitoring this person. This is why the board does not need to be concerned that there's going to be other issues in the future for this particular professional. So that's a perfect example of that. Other things that people can do, we can get sometimes letters from people who are respected peers who understand the situation, but say, despite that fact, they understand something about their character and their skill in other areas and are willing to vouch for that person. And we help assist people with how to draft good letters and how to, so they don't all sound like cookie cutter, all exactly the same. We want them unique, but we want to make sure certain things are addressed and they do know about the issue that led to this whole situation.
Do you ever engage in advanced testing like ETG testing and things like that so that we can prove that this was a one-time thing or the level of alcohol is not high? Explain to the audience a little bit about that kind of thing.
Okay, absolutely. So the example I was just giving, well, it was a breath testing unit, a portable breath testing unit that the client was able to keep with her at all times. She tested 3 times a day on that machine. It was able to show she wasn't using alcohol at all. Other types of testing might involve urine testing or ETG testing, which is helpful to prove someone's innocence sometimes while they're on bond. Many clients will miss a testing window, and then the court doesn't know if the person was using alcohol or not, and their assumption is that they violated their bond and they might put them in jail or raise their bond or have other serious ramifications from that. So one of the things that I can advise my clients to do is get an ETG test very quickly, which can then prove a larger window of time if there was no alcohol consumption. And that's helped a lot of clients with that situation. So ETG tests can be helpful as well. Hair tests, depending on what substances they're looking for and things. Sometimes a hair test is a very useful thing that proactively we can use to show a very long period of time that there wasn't certain controlled substances being used. And that helps in diversion cases as well, where clients have been accused of drug diversion.
What other factors or key points do you think our audience should know about impaired driving or drunk driving? It seems to be happening more and more. What else do they need to know? How do we protect them from the beginning?
Well, right from the beginning, I've gone through the training that the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration puts the officers through. So I've gone through that same training and certified in that. So when officers are administering those different tests around the country, I can look at video footage of that and see if the officers perform those tests correctly. So the training that I have specifically in drunk driving defense is very helpful on that side of things, as well as blood cases. There are a lot of times blood might be taken, and in this, the state of Michigan right now, blood testing is very much on the rise. So breath tests may not be trusted, so they might do a blood test instead. Well, there are a lot of attorneys out there that have no idea that there are things that can be looked at as far as the chromatography of the blood testing, where we can look at those results and actually analyze them. And sometimes I had a nurse that I helped who had an accident and a pretty high blood alcohol level, and ultimately we were able to get a littering result out of that, not drunk driving or impaired driving or anything like that. And that was based on the review of the blood work there. If we hadn't found that there and known what to request and how to review it, that would never have been the case there. So those are the kind of things that having that extra knowledge about those things can really, really help. There's plenty of people who say they handle drunk driving cases, but I really have a passion for helping the clients and looking for those little needles in the haystack that sometimes can be the difference between a client who's able to keep their concealed pistol license and the client who's able to keep custody of their child because they still have their driver's license, they get to and from work and be able to support their child. Those kinds of things matter. And so once we know those things that matter, then we can use that and work backwards to try and see how we can accomplish the client's goals.
Now, at least in Michigan, in all states, the drunk driving or impaired driving and the administrative charge, those are 2 completely separate processes, right?
Correct.
One is the criminal justice court, you're going to court. The other is a licensing body that is looking to see, are you safe to practice? Did you violate any rules? That type of thing, correct?
That's absolutely correct. So if we can avoid a conviction in the criminal case, there's nothing to report to the administrative bodies for the licensing matter, and there's not going to be a licensing matter unless there's somehow another way that they find out about behavior. They can still find behavior to be outside, a violation of a public health code, depending on what it might be, whether or not there's actually a conviction. But many, many things, if we're able to avoid a conviction, get a civil infraction or something that doesn't have a conviction, or get it dismissed completely, or not guilty at trial, then there is not anything to be reported over to the state and the licensing side of things. But they're two completely separate worlds, and you have to have knowledge about both if you're going to represent somebody in both. And luckily, I have knowledge in both those areas, so I can help clients from beginning to end in the process. I don't have to farm it out to somebody else at the end because I don't understand professional licensing, and I have to wait for it to come to me and wait till a conviction's happened. I can have an impact on that first part of things and try to avoid a conviction because I know how to represent clients in criminal matters as well.
And you are available for people to call if they call Chapman Law Group. Any
Absolutely.
one of our numbers, ask for yourself, they can get to you. And you're not only available in this one small area where we're talking about impaired or drunk driving, but you handle regulatory and some criminal, but mostly regulatory. So any licensing type of cases in the state of Michigan where you are, you're open for business and ready to handle those.
That's absolutely true. So I handle within the criminal law more the state court criminal work. So federal is predominantly others at our firm, and state court work is predominantly me. So it's felonies or misdemeanors that are charged by the state of Michigan, charged by local entities, townships, cities, villages. I handle all those types of matters. Domestic violence matters. Those can have a big impact on your future. So please be aware of that. Things that are as simple as an argument can go to the level of causing a huge impact on your career, as well as drunk driving and impaired driving, which we have many of those. But there's also things, drug diversion is a huge area, and I handle a lot of those matters. And those are typically charged as felonies, even though some of my clients who are charged with those have typically never had a conviction or for anything in their life, never been charged for anything. And that's another matter we can talk about later, but that's a huge area that we see a lot of charges being made against people in that.
And the common thread with all of your clients is they are all healthcare providers. Chapman Law Group is a healthcare law firm, and we only represent healthcare providers that may get involved in these other matters, primarily because those other matters seriously can have a serious impact on your license, on your livelihood, on your ability to practice nursing, massage therapy, PT, being a physician, or any of those things.
That's absolutely correct. So there are many, many people who practice criminal law who may have no idea that there's an impact on somebody's career from that. And so they represent them only knowing, well, let's worry about the driver's license, or let's worry about some of these other things that are there. And they don't realize there's a reporting requirement. Many people have been represented by counsel and have come to me later on saying, I got this administrative complaint that says I never reported this conviction. I had no idea I had to report a conviction. And that's a serious issue because there's people typically look when they're in trouble for something like this, they search for criminal attorneys, not for healthcare attorneys, because they're not thinking long-term about what could happen to their healthcare license. So for those who are looking for defense, not just looking at, well, how do we keep you out of jail here, which is also very important, but how do we protect your whole life and your livelihood? This is the right place to be because we'll look not only in isolation at some criminal matter as one little thing, we'll look at it with both my professional licensing hat as well as my criminal defense hat and try to see how we protect you as best possible throughout the whole matter.
Sounds good. That's all the time we have today. Thank you so much, Rob, for joining us. And thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for tuning in. These video blogs, we'll be bringing more and more of them to you, talking about specific areas, not only of regulatory, but compliance, white collar, civil litigation when it comes to medical malpractice defense or other types of litigation between medical providers, etc. So thank you so much for joining, and we look forward to seeing you next time. Have a great day.